I switched my cheating husband's lubricant with glue. The fire crew had to pull them apart. The morning I found the tube in Julian's glove compartment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even let my face change. I simply put it back exactly where it had been, shut the compartment with the same soft click, and stood there in the dim garage as if the air itself had thickened into something I could no longer breathe. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. For 40 years I had learned the rhythms of my marriage the way a baker learns dough. The quiet rise and fall. The temperature shifts. The small signs that something was about to collapse. In the beginning, Julian's habits were ordinary and almost comforting. He left his keys in the same bowl by the door. He folded his newspaper into neat squares. He kissed my forehead before bed as if that small touch could seal the day shut and keep the world outside from getting in. I built a life around those reliable little rituals, built a home with steady hands, built a business with burned knuckles and early mornings. I believed, for most of my life, that I knew what I had. But lately, even the house sounded different. The walls held silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. The old clock in the kitchen ticked with a sharpness I had never noticed before, as if it had been counting down to something and I was only now hearing it clearly. Julian's laughter had become rarer. His patience is thinner. He carried his phone like it was a second heartbeat, and when it buzzed he turned away from me so quickly it was almost a reflex. At night he would climb into bed and face the far wall, leaving a strip of cold sheet between us like a border neither of us was allowed to cross. He had excuses for everything. Work was stressful. His back hurt. He was tired. He was getting older. I accepted those excuses the way a woman accepts rain in a long season of storms, because arguing doesn't stop the clouds and sometimes you tell yourself the sky will clear if you just wait long enough. Then came the perfume. It was faint at first, like something clinging to the edge of his collar, a floral sweetness that didn't belong in our home. I wore soft rose oils because they reminded me of my mother's garden and the little pink blooms she used to cut and set in water by the sink. This scent was brighter, sharper, the kind that announces itself before a woman even enters the room. I smelled it on Julian as he hung his jacket on the chair and loosened his tie with a tired little sigh, and I watched him carefully. I watched the way his eyes slid away from mine. I watched the quick, forced smile that came and went like a light flickering under a door. That night he said he had been in Dallas. He said it casually, as if geography was nothing more than a word on his tongue, as if it couldn't be checked, as if it didn't matter. He ate 2 bites of dinner, pushed his plate away, and went upstairs without even rinsing his glass. Within minutes, I heard the familiar heavy sound of his sleep. Not the soft sleep of a man at peace, but the deep, thick collapse of a man who was running from something all day and wanted his body to outrun his mind. I stayed downstairs, cleaning with slow, deliberate motions because I needed something simple to hold on to. I gathered his jacket, his wallet, his laptop. His phone was lying on the table, screen glowing with an email notification, and the sight of it made my stomach tighten. Julian claimed he hated email. He always said it was too complicated, that it was for young people and corporate types, that he preferred calls where he could hear a voice and be done with it. Yet there it was, bright and waiting like a dare. I told myself I was only going to clear it off the table. I told myself I was only going to check if it was something urgent. I told myself 100 small lies in the span of 2 seconds, because the truth was simpler and uglier. I needed to know what was happening in my own life. I opened it. The message was short. It was the kind of sentence that takes up almost no space on a screen but can split a person in half. You were incredible tonight, Dad. A red heart sat beneath it like a smear of fresh paint. I stared at the word Dad until my eyes blurred. For a moment my mind tried to soften it, tried to reshape it into something harmless. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was spam. Maybe it was a mistake sent to the wrong address. But the coldness in my chest spread too quickly for comfort. Julian was a father, yes, but Daniel was grown, and Daniel didn't send his father hearts like that. Daniel didn't call him Dad in a message that sounded like it had been written with a smile pressed against someone's ear. I scrolled, searching for context, for a thread, for anything that could explain it away. There was nothing. Just that one message, sitting alone like a single footprint in snow. Julian turned over upstairs, the bed creaking, the sound of his breath changing. It made me move fast, hands suddenly clumsy. I set the phone down as if it had burned me. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my wrists, in the tender places behind my knees. I stood there in the kitchen with the light above the sink humming softly and realized I was shaking. I had raised a son. I had built a chain of bakeries with my own recipes and my own sweat. I had handled burnt batches and late payments and broken ovens. I had comforted employees through divorces and funerals. I had watched my mother die and still opened the bakery the next morning because bills don't pause for grief. I thought I knew what strength was. But betrayal does something different to you. It doesn't just hurt. It rearranges reality. It makes you look at your own memories and wonder which ones were real and which ones were staged for your benefit. I forced myself to keep moving. I picked up Julian's pants from where he had dropped them earlier and checked the pockets for laundry the way I always did. My fingers brushed paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it slowly. A receipt. A fancy steakhouse. San Antonio. Tonight's date. Party of 2. A bottle of Cabernet I recognized because Julian had once bought it for our 10th anniversary, back when he still looked at me like I was something precious. Dallas, he had said. San Antonio, the paper whispered back. A strange, bitter sound came out of me. Half laugh, half breath. I stared at the printed ink as if it might shift into something else if I waited long enough. It did not. It stayed sharp and stubborn and real. I took my phone and photographed the receipt. Then I photographed the email. Evidence. That was the word that surfaced in my mind, clinical and cold. Evidence was what you gathered when truth stopped being a feeling and became a case. After that, sleep was not an option. I moved through the night like a ghost, checking small things that suddenly felt important. Julian's jacket pocket had a folded napkin with a smear of lipstick. His car smelled faintly of that sweet perfume. The crumbs on the passenger seat weren't from my kitchen. I didn't know whose life I was touching, but I could feel it everywhere, like fingerprints on glass. In the early hours, I went to the garage. The air was cool and smelled of oil and old wood. Julian's SUV sat there like an ordinary object, harmless at first glance. I opened the door and used the flashlight on my phone, sweeping it slowly across the seats, the console, the floor. When I reached into the glove compartment, my fingers found the tube. Used. Cap messy. The kind of object that shouldn't have been in my husband's car when my husband and I hadn't touched each other in years. Not in that way. Not with need. Not with anything that required extra help. For a moment I couldn't feel my hands. I just stood there holding it, aware of the silence around me, aware of my own breathing, aware of how small and stupid a tube of plastic could make a woman feel. I put it back. I closed the compartment. I wiped my hands with a rag until my skin felt raw, because I couldn't scrub the betrayal off my life, but I could at least scrub it off my palms. In the morning, I made breakfast like I always did. The habit of caretaking can outlive love. Julian came down with sleep still clinging to his face and poured himself coffee. He didn't look at me when he spoke. I have a meeting, he said, voice rough. Might be home late. I watched him take a sip, watched the coffee wet his lip, watched him set the mug down too hard as if even the kitchen was an enemy he needed to conquer. All right, I said, and my voice came out steady. Too steady. He patted my shoulder on his way out. Not a kiss. Not an embrace. Just a brief touch, like a man touching a countertop to steady himself. When the door closed behind him, the house felt like it exhaled. I stood in the kitchen with plates in my hands and realized something important. I didn't have the luxury of guessing anymore. Guessing was how women stayed trapped for years. Guessing was what kept you quiet at dinner while your husband lied. Guessing was what made you feel crazy when you couldn't prove what you already knew. If I wanted to survive this, I needed truth. Not feelings. not suspicions. Truth that could be held up in daylight. There was one person I could call without shame. Mrs. Miller. She had been a friend when I opened my first bakery, back when I was still proving myself, back when Julian still pretended he was proud. Mrs. Miller was the kind of woman who could look at a room and tell you what had happened in it hours earlier. She had once mentioned, almost offhand, that she knew a private investigator who worked discreetly. At the time I had laughed and told her I would never need such a thing. She had only looked at me with that knowing expression older women wear like armor. That afternoon I sat in my office at the bakery, the smell of warm bread drifting in from the ovens, and dialed her number. My fingers trembled around the phone. When she answered, her voice was calm. Juliet. The sound of my name in her mouth almost broke me. I forced myself to speak evenly. Do you still have that number? I asked. For Thomas. A pause stretched between us. I could hear the soft hum of her television in the background, the faint clink of something in her kitchen. What happened? She asked gently, not as gossip, but as concern. I just need the truth, I said. That's all. She didn't press. She didn't lecture. She didn't tell me to pray or forgive or be patient. She simply said she would send it, and within the hour I received a message with a time and a place. Noon. A small cafe downtown. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where the shadows held me. My hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee that I didn't drink. I watched people come and go, watched couples laugh, watched a mother wipe her child's face, watched ordinary life continue with its cruel confidence. Thomas arrived without drama. Middle-aged. Stocky. Simple clothes. Eyes that looked like they had seen every kind of lie and no longer flinched. He sat across from me and waited without speaking until I was ready. I handed him a small drive and showed him the photos on my phone. The email. The receipt. The tube I had found. The perfume-stained napkin. His face didn't change much. Only his gaze sharpened slightly, like a blade being drawn. This doesn't prove everything, he said, careful. But it proves enough to start. I don't want revenge, I lied automatically, because even then I didn't know what I wanted. I just want to know. He nodded. I'll follow him. I'll be discreet. Don't confront him yet. Don't let him know you suspect anything. I left the cafe feeling both lighter and sicker. Lighter because someone else was now carrying part of the burden. Sicker because hiring an investigator felt like stepping across a line you can't uncross. Once you pay someone to watch your husband, you admit your marriage is no longer a private life. It becomes a case. That night, I worked late at the bakery, signing invoices and checking delivery lists, pretending the numbers mattered more than my own heartbeat. Around 10, my phone vibrated. A message from Thomas. I opened it with hands that suddenly felt too large, too clumsy. The first photo loaded slowly, and in that delay my mind tried to protect me, tried to imagine harmless shapes. Then the image sharpened. Julian, stepping out of his car in front of an elegant restaurant, and beside him a woman. They were close. Not like colleagues. Not like family. I zoomed in, and the world went quiet in my ears. Allison. My daughter-in-law. Her hair was styled differently than the way she wore it at family dinners. Her lipstick was darker. She looked younger, bolder, like a woman playing a role she had rehearsed. Julian's hand was on the small of her back, guiding her inside with an intimacy that made my throat close. More photos followed. A corner table. Candles. Her leaning toward him, smiling. Julian's face softened in a way I had not seen in years, not even in the bakery when I achieved something worth celebrating. It wasn't just infidelity. It was cruelty. Because it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I had brought into my home. Someone I had hugged. Someone I had taught to bake. Someone I had welcomed at holidays, thinking I was building a bigger family. I sat there in my office, surrounded by the scent of sugar and flour, and the reality finally settled into place like heavy stone. Julian wasn't just leaving me behind. He was betraying our son. A new message arrived from Thomas. A short video. Grainy, but clear enough. Julian opened the car door for Allison. She touched his arm with a familiarity that made my skin prickle. They disappeared into the night. I saved everything. Every photo. Every clip. I labeled them with dates and times like I was cataloging evidence in a courtroom. A strange calm began to spread through me, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. I wasn't calm because I was fine. I was calm because something inside me had finally stopped hoping. The next morning I returned to my house and looked at Julian differently. He stood at the sink rinsing his mug, humming softly, as if he had no idea his life was unraveling. He glanced at me, smile quick and careless. "Long day yesterday," he said. I nodded, matching his tone. "Yes." He kissed my cheek, an empty little peck that felt like a stamp on a lie, and left. As soon as he was gone, I sat down at the kitchen table with my phone, my evidence, and a truth so sharp it felt like it could cut through bone. I was no longer guessing. I was no longer wondering if I was imagining things. Now I knew, and knowledge is a dangerous thing. It doesn't just hurt you. It changes you. It asks you what you will do next, and it doesn't let you pretend there are no choices. By midday, Thomas sent another message. He said Julian and Allison had been seen entering a law office together. He didn't speculate, didn't dramatize it. He simply stated it like a man used to watching people make decisions that destroy lives. A law office. My bakery chain was mine. I had built it from one small shop into several locations, expanding only when I could afford it, signing contracts with hotels and event planners, negotiating with suppliers, learning every part of the business because I never trusted anyone else to care as much as I did. Julian had always said he was proud, but he rarely attended meetings with me. He rarely stepped into my world unless there was something to gain. A law office wasn't just about an affair. It was about planning. I sat at the table, staring at the sunlight on the floor, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Betrayal was one thing. Theft was another. If Julian and Allison were meeting lawyers, if they were making paperwork, it meant they weren't only taking what was private. They were coming for what I had built. I looked around the kitchen, at the familiar cabinets, the worn chair where Julian used to sit and read the paper, the framed wedding photo on the wall. A life I had thought was mine. I realized then that the story of my marriage wasn't ending quietly. It was building toward something public, something sharp, something that would force the truth into the open whether anyone wanted it there or not. And I promised myself, as I sat alone in that quiet house, that I would not be the last person to know what was happening in my own life. I would not be the woman who smiled at family dinners while two people across from her plotted behind her back. I would not be the one left in the ashes while they walked away with everything. I didn't yet know what I would do, but I knew I was done being blind. And in that moment, with the evidence saved and my heart hardening into something steadier, I began to plan for what came next. Not with reckless harm, not with dangerous games, but with the one thing that could finally protect me. The truth, gathered carefully, step by step, until it was heavy enough to drop in front of them and make the whole lie collapse. By the second week, I stopped pretending that I was still the woman I had been before. Something fundamental had shifted inside me, like a foundation cracking quietly under a house that still looked perfectly fine from the outside. I went through my days smiling at customers, approving invoices, tasting dough, adjusting oven temperatures, but everything felt like it was happening behind glass. I was present, but untouched, watching my own life as if it belonged to someone else. Thomas continued his work without drama. He never called unnecessarily, never tried to soften what he found. His messages came at odd hours, always brief, always precise. A photo here. A note there. Julian leaving work early. Julian meeting Allison in places that had nothing to do with family or business. Cafes on the edge of town. Hotels with discreet entrances. Long drives that ended nowhere near the meetings Julian claimed to attend. The evidence grew quietly, like a stack of papers placed neatly in a drawer that no one else knew existed. Each new piece should have broken me further, but instead it hardened something inside me. Pain, when stretched too long, stops screaming. It learns to sit still and wait. What hurt most wasn't even the affair anymore. It was the ease of it. The way Julian moved through his lies as if they were second nature. The way Allison smiled at me during Sunday dinners, complimented my cooking, asked about my health. The way she hugged Daniel with an affection that now felt staged, rehearsed, like part of a performance designed to keep us all blind. Daniel. My son. That was the thought that woke me at night, the one that made my chest tighten until I had to sit up and breathe slowly. He loved his wife. He trusted his father. He talked about starting a family soon, about buying a bigger house, about stability. I had watched him grow from a boy who scraped his knees on the driveway into a man who ran into burning buildings for a living. I had raised him to believe in loyalty, in honesty, in doing the right thing even when it was hard. And all the while, the two people closest to him were carving a secret life out of his. I wondered how long it had been going on. Months. A year. Longer. I replayed family gatherings in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. The way Allison sometimes avoided Julian's eyes. The tension I had mistaken for dislike. The awkward silences that now made sense in a sickening way. It hadn't been discomfort. It had been restraint. At home, Julian began to act differently toward me. Kinder, almost. He brought flowers one evening, cheap ones from the grocery store, and placed them on the counter with an awkward smile. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said. I thanked him, arranging them in a vase I had used for decades. I didn't comment on the fact that surprises had never been his style. I didn't ask what he was compensating for. I simply watched him carefully, the way one watches a person who doesn't know the floor beneath them is already giving way. A few nights later, he mentioned paperwork. "There are some documents I need to sign soon," he said casually over dinner. "Business things. Might need your input." My hand paused over my plate. I kept my expression neutral, my voice even. "Of course," I said. "We'll look at them when they come." He nodded, satisfied, and changed the subject. That was when I knew for certain that the affair was only one piece of a larger betrayal. Julian wasn't just hiding a relationship. He was laying groundwork. Contracts, lawyers, signatures. Things that moved money and ownership. Things that could quietly strip a woman of everything she had built while she was still busy making dinner. I went to the bakery early the next morning and pulled every document related to ownership. Deeds. Incorporation papers. Bank records. I sat in my small office and read through them slowly, line by line, with the same careful attention I gave to new recipes. I had always insisted on keeping my name on everything, not because I distrusted Julian, but because I believed in clarity. Now that habit felt like a lifeline. Everything was still mine. For now. That afternoon, Thomas sent another message. Julian and Allison had been seen leaving a law office together again. This time they stayed longer. Too long for a casual consultation. I stared at the message, then at the wall in front of me, where a framed article hung from a local newspaper praising my bakery's expansion. The headline talked about perseverance, about a woman who built something lasting through patience and hard work. I remembered the interview, remembered how Julian had stood behind the photographer, arms crossed, smiling proudly. I had believed that smile meant support. Now I understood it differently. That night, Julian came home later than usual. He smelled of alcohol and that same perfume, faint but unmistakable. He didn't even bother with an excuse this time. He dropped his keys on the counter and slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "Rough day," he muttered. I poured him water, watched his hands shake slightly as he drank. He looked older lately. Not just tired, but worn down by the effort of maintaining too many versions of himself. "You should rest," I said softly. He nodded and went upstairs without another word. I waited until the house was quiet before moving. I went to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept old documents and photographs, and added another envelope beneath them. Inside were copies of everything Thomas had sent me so far. I labeled it simply, with a date. Evidence. I didn't know yet who would need to see it, but I knew better than to keep it all in one place. I made another copy and stored it at the bakery, hidden behind stacks of old invoices. Redundancy was something business had taught me well. Over the next few days, I began to observe instead of confront. I noted patterns. Julian's phone never left his side anymore. He stepped outside to take calls, lowering his voice even when no one else was home. He changed passwords, something he had never bothered with before. His lies grew smoother, delivered with a confidence that suggested practice. One evening, I pretended to be tired and went to bed early. I turned off the lamp, closed my eyes, and listened. Julian stayed downstairs longer than usual. I could hear the faint murmur of his voice, low and intimate, the cadence different from the way he spoke to me. I waited until his footsteps faded, then got up quietly and followed the sound. He stood near the window in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his back to me. "Yes," he said softly. "She'll be out of town. It's perfect." I froze behind the doorway, my heart thudding. "No," he continued, a faint laugh in his voice. "She doesn't suspect a thing." There was a pause, then a softer tone I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Just be careful," he said. "We're almost there. Almost there." The words echoed in my mind long after he ended the call and returned upstairs. I stood in the dark living room, staring at the reflection of myself in the window. A woman in her late 60s, hair streaked with gray, hands rough from decades of work. A woman who had trusted too deeply for too long. Almost where, Julian? The next morning, I told him I would be traveling soon. A potential partner in another city. A contract discussion that couldn't be postponed. His reaction was immediate and telling. Surprise, followed by something like relief. He smiled, took my hand, wished me luck. Too easily. That was when the last piece of my plan clicked into place. If Julian believed I was gone, he would relax. He would stop being careful. He would bring his secret fully into the open, convinced there was no one left to witness it. People who believe they are safe make mistakes. They stop hiding. I prepared quietly. I checked old devices, old tools, things Daniel had left behind years ago when he moved out. In a drawer, I found a small recorder he had used in college. I tested it, replaced the batteries, made sure it still worked. Technology changes, but some things remain useful long past their time. I waited for the right night. Julian drank more than usual, his words slurring as he complained about work and clients I now knew didn't exist. When he finally passed out, I moved with deliberate calm. I placed the recorder carefully, hidden behind a bookshelf in the bedroom, angled toward the bed. I tested it once, listening to the soft hum of the room through my headphones. Clear enough. I returned to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. Fear had given way to focus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about exposure. About protecting what was mine. About making sure the truth couldn't be denied when it finally surfaced. Before dawn, I set the rest of my plan in motion. Nothing reckless. Nothing that would put lives at risk. Just enough to draw attention when the time came. Just enough to force an interruption. A disruption big enough that no one could pretend it hadn't happened. When the morning came, I kissed Julian's cheek goodbye and told him I would call later. He barely opened his eyes, murmured something affectionate, and rolled over. I walked out of my house with my bag over my shoulder and didn't look back. Instead of leaving town, I crossed the street. Mrs. Peterson opened her door in a robe, surprised to see me so early. "I need to sit somewhere," I said gently. "Just for a few hours." She studied my face, then stepped aside without a question. From her front window, I had a clear view of my own house. The curtains, the driveway, the door Julian would open without fear. I sat there with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands and waited. Because by then, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, The truth was no longer going to stay hidden. And once it came out, nothing, no lies, no contracts, no carefully built deceptions, would survive it intact. The waiting was the hardest part, not because I doubted what would happen, but because time seemed to stretch itself thin, pulling every second longer than it needed to be. From Mrs. Peterson's front window, I watched my own house the way one watches a stage before the curtain rises. It looked unchanged, peaceful. The lawn trimmed. The curtains drawn just enough to keep private things private. Anyone passing by would have thought it was an ordinary morning in an ordinary neighborhood. Nothing more than birdsong and the distant hum of traffic. Mrs. Peterson moved quietly around her kitchen, giving me space without asking questions. She placed a second cup of coffee near me and rested a hand briefly on my shoulder before returning to her chair. That small gesture nearly undid me. Kindness, in moments like that, feels sharper than cruelty. Around mid-morning, a taxi pulled up. My breath caught, though I had expected it. I watched as Allison stepped out, smoothing her dress, glancing up and down the street with the caution of someone who believed she was being clever. She looked different than she did at family dinners. Lighter. Freer. As if the role she played in my presence weighed heavily on her and she could finally set it down. Julian opened the door before she even reached it. He looked around quickly, then ushered her inside, closing the door behind them with an eagerness that told me everything I needed to know. I did not move. I lifted my phone, opened the application connected to the recorder, and listened. At first, there was laughter. The kind that slips out easily when people believe they are safe. Then voices, close and intimate, words overlapping. I heard Allison teasing Julian about how careful he'd been lately, how tense he always seemed. I heard Julian laugh it off, heard him say that things were almost settled now, that soon there would be nothing left to worry about. Almost settled. The phrase returned, heavier this time. I closed my eyes briefly, grounding myself. This wasn't the moment for emotion. Emotion would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. Minutes passed. Sounds shifted. Footsteps. The creak of the bed. I turned the volume down, not because I didn't need proof, but because I already had enough. I didn't need to hear intimacy to understand betrayal. I had lived it. When Allison spoke again, her tone had changed. Less playful. More deliberate. "Did you talk to the notary?" she asked. Julian answered without hesitation. "Yes. He's on board. We just need the final signatures." "And she still doesn't know?" Allison asked. Julian's reply came quickly, confidently. "She trusts me. She always has." That sentence landed harder than anything else. Trust wasn't just something I had given Julian. It was something I had defended. I had defended him when friends hinted that he took my work for granted. I had defended him when family members joked about him living off my success. I had defended him to myself, over and over, telling myself that love meant loyalty even when things felt uneven. Hearing him say that so casually, like a tool he had sharpened and used, hollowed something out of me. Then Allison laughed. "She's so naive," she said. "Once everything's transferred, it won't matter anymore." I opened my eyes and stared at my house, at the walls that had held birthdays and arguments and long quiet evenings, at the kitchen where I had taught Allison how to caramelize sugar without burning it. The word naive echoed in my ears, bitter and cruel. That was when I acted. I triggered the mechanism I had prepared earlier, simple and controlled, enough to cause disruption without destruction. Within moments, smoke began to pour from the kitchen window, dark and unmistakable, curling into the sky like a signal flare. Mrs. Peterson gasped beside me. "My God," she said. "Your house." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "Please call the fire department." She didn't hesitate. The neighborhood responded faster than I expected. Doors opened. Voices rose. Someone shouted that there might be people inside. Another neighbor grabbed a phone. The quiet street transformed into motion and alarm, exactly as I had intended. In my headphones, Panic replaced laughter. "What's that smell?" Allison's voice cracked. Julian swore, his tone sharp. "Stay calm." The sound of movement followed, frantic now, footsteps rushing. Then confusion. Raised voices. I didn't need to hear more. I knew what was happening inside those walls. The fire engine arrived with a scream of sirens that cut through the air and my chest at the same time. I watched as firefighters poured out, moving with urgency and precision. And then I saw Daniel. My son stepped down from the truck, helmet in hand, his posture alert, his expression focused. He looked every bit the man he had become, strong, capable, steady under pressure. I swallowed hard. This was the part one hadn't fully prepared my heart for. Daniel gave orders quickly, his voice firm as his team moved toward the house. He broke down the door without hesitation, disappearing inside along with the others. From where I stood, I couldn't see what he saw, but I heard it through the recorder. The sudden silence, the sharp intake of breath, the stunned disbelief in his voice when reality collided with expectation. "What is this?" he said, his words barely audible. I closed my eyes. The truth has a way of announcing itself loudly, even when no one wants to hear it. Within minutes, the situation was under control. The smoke dissipated. There was no real fire damage. But the damage that mattered had already been done. People gathered. Whispers spread. The story moved faster than I ever could have. Julian and Allison were brought out wrapped in sheets, their faces pale, their shame visible even as they tried to hide it. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. The image would never leave me anyway. The ambulance doors closed. The siren wailed again, carrying them away. Daniel stood frozen on the lawn, helmet dangling from his hand. His shoulders sagged as if something heavy had finally landed on them. I wanted to run to him, to pull him into my arms, to shield him from the stares and the murmurs and the cruel clarity of the moment. But I didn't. Not yet. He needed space to breathe, to process, to feel what he felt without my presence shaping it. A mother's instinct is to protect, but sometimes protection means stepping back. Later at the hospital, I played my role carefully. The shocked wife. The confused mother. The woman blindsided by scandal. No one questioned it. No one suspected the quiet woman who clutched her purse and spoke softly could have orchestrated anything. A doctor explained that there had been no permanent harm. Separation had been difficult but successful. Skin irritation. Nothing life-threatening. I nodded and thanked him. In the hallway, I waited while nurses moved in and out. When I was finally allowed into the room, Julian looked at me with something like desperation. Allison couldn't meet my eyes at all. Julian tried to speak. I raised a hand. "There's nothing to explain," I said calmly. "I already know." I placed the folder on the bedside table. Copies of messages, photos, transcripts, documents Thomas had helped me obtain. Proof not only of the affair, but of the planned transfer of my business. Julian's face drained of color as he flipped through them. "It's over," I said. "All of it." Daniel appeared in the doorway then, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at me. In his eyes I saw pain, yes, but also something else. Understanding. Recognition. He knew I hadn't acted out of madness or spite. He knew I had done what I had to do. He handed me another set of papers. Divorce documents. Julian's hand shook as he signed. Allison sobbed, pleading, apologizing, promising. Daniel didn't respond. He turned and walked out without a word, leaving behind a silence heavier than any argument. I followed him into the hallway and wrapped my arms around him. He didn't resist. He didn't collapse either. He simply stood there, breathing, letting the reality settle. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "So am I," I replied. We left together. In the weeks that followed, the world shifted again, this time more slowly. Julian moved out. Allison disappeared from our lives entirely. Legal matters were resolved with the help of a lawyer who spoke plainly and worked efficiently. My business remained mine. Untouched. Protected. The bakery thrived. Customers came not out of pity, but loyalty. They praised my strength, my resilience, my refusal to be broken. I accepted their words with gratitude, but I didn't wear them like armor. Strength wasn't something I felt. It was something I practiced, one day at a time. Daniel moved in with me. We worked side by side, rediscovering a rhythm that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with rebuilding. He learned the business. I learned how to let him help. Some nights were quiet. Some were heavy. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small moments, shared meals, laughter that surprised us both, the simple comfort of knowing we were no longer living inside a lie. I didn't win, but I survived. And sometimes, survival is the truest form of justice there is. The days that followed settled into a strange new pattern, one that felt unfamiliar yet oddly steady. Life did not return to what it had been, but it did not collapse either. It reshaped itself around what remained, trimming away what had rotted beneath the surface. I learned quickly that endings are rarely loud after the noise fades. Most of them arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary mornings. Julian moved out within a week. He didn't argue. He didn't plead again. The papers were signed, the accounts separated, and the house, my house, fell silent in a way it never had before. His absence was not dramatic. It was hollow. A missing chair at the table. An empty hook by the door. 40 years reduced to a handful of cardboard boxes carried out by movers who did not know our story and did not need to. I watched from the kitchen window as the truck pulled away. I expected relief. What I felt instead was gravity, as if something heavy had finally been set down after years of being carried without question. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply stood there, breathing, letting the moment pass through me without resistance. Daniel stayed. That mattered more than I could explain. He moved into the guest room at first, quiet and careful, as if afraid of taking up too much space. I told him it was his home too, that he didn't need to tiptoe around grief. He nodded, but habits like that don't disappear overnight. Trauma makes people small before it teaches them how to stand again. At the bakery, word spread fast. Small towns thrive on stories, and ours had all the ingredients people talk about in hushed voices. Betrayal. Family. Shame. I braced myself for pity, for whispers behind my back, for sideways glances that would follow me down the aisles. What I received instead was something else. Support. Customers came in not to ask questions, but to buy more than usual. Extra loaves. Extra pastries. One woman pressed my hands between hers and told me she admired my strength. Another left a note on the counter thanking me for years of kindness and consistency. People who had watched me build something over decades recognized what had happened without needing details. They understood loss. They understood endurance. The bakery grew busier, not quieter. It was as if the place itself refused to let me fall. The ovens kept their steady rhythm. The dough rose the way it always had. The work demanded my attention, and in that demand, it gave me purpose when my thoughts threatened to spiral. Daniel began helping more, not out of obligation, but because he needed something solid to hold on to. He learned the schedules, the supplier calls, the careful balancing act between quality and cost. He asked questions. He listened. I saw pieces of myself in him, the same stubborn focus, the same refusal to quit once something mattered. We didn't talk much about what had happened at first. Silence was safer. Silence allowed wounds to scab instead of tearing open again. When words did come, they arrived slowly, usually late at night when the house was quiet and the world felt far away. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table eating a simple meal, Daniel broke that silence. "I keep replaying it," he said quietly. "All the signs. All the moments I missed." I set my fork down and looked at him. "You didn't miss them," I said. They hid them. He shook his head, jaw tight. I trusted them. So did I replied. Trust isn't a flaw. It only feels like one when someone abuses it. He didn't answer right away. He stared at his hands, scarred and strong from years of work, from years of saving strangers while his own world burned unnoticed. I don't know how to forgive, he admitted. You don't have to, I said. Not now. Maybe not ever. That seemed to ease something in him. People talk about forgiveness as if it's mandatory, as if healing can't happen without it. I had learned otherwise. Healing comes from honesty, from boundaries, from choosing yourself when others didn't. Julian tried to call once. I didn't answer. He left a message, his voice thin and strained, apologizing again, explaining again, as if repetition might change reality. I deleted it without listening to the end. Closure does not always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from silence. Allison never reached out. That didn't surprise me. As weeks turned into months, I found myself rediscovering parts of my life I had set aside without noticing. I joined a small cooking group at the community center, a place where women my age shared recipes and laughter without competition or judgment. I walked more. I slept better. I went to church again, not for answers, but for stillness. Daniel began to change too. Slowly. Subtly. He laughed more often. He talked about work again, about calls that went well, about moments that reminded him why he chose the job he did. The heaviness in his eyes didn't vanish, but it softened. One afternoon, as we closed the bakery together, he looked around the empty space and said, "You built all this." I smiled faintly. "Not alone. But you led it," he insisted. "You always did." That was something I hadn't let myself acknowledge before. I had spent years sharing credit, downplaying my own role, smoothing over imbalances to keep peace. Now, standing there with my son beside me, I allowed myself to accept the truth of it. Yes, I had built it. I had also rebuilt myself. The scandal faded into memory the way all public outrage does. New stories replaced it. New gossip took its place. Julian became a cautionary tale people mentioned less and less. Allison vanished entirely, her absence loud only to those who remembered her. I didn't follow their lives. I didn't need to. My life was here, in the warmth of ovens, in the quiet strength of routine, in the bond between a mother and a son who had both been betrayed and both survived. One night, as I locked up the bakery and turned off the lights, I felt something unexpected settle over me. Peace. Not the naive peace of believing nothing bad will ever happen again, but the earned peace of knowing that if it does, I will endure. I had lost a marriage, yes. I had lost the illusion of the family I thought I had. But I had not lost myself. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. The final shape of my life did not announce itself all at once. It arrived quietly, in moments so small they almost felt unimportant at the time. A morning when I woke without dread pressing against my chest. An afternoon when laughter came easily and stayed a little longer. An evening when the house felt like shelter again instead of evidence. I learned that survival does not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels ordinary. Sometimes it feels like washing dishes without thinking about who will come home later. Sometimes it feels like choosing what to plant in the garden because you will still be here to watch it grow. The house slowly became mine again. Not because Julian's things were gone, but because the air changed. I rearranged furniture without asking anyone's opinion. I painted the guest room Daniel slept in a soft, warm color he chose himself. I replaced the ticking clock in the kitchen with a quieter one, not because the old one was broken, but because I no longer needed the reminder of time pressing down on me. Daniel stayed through it all. At first, he kept busy, filling silence with work and responsibility, afraid that if he slowed down the weight of what had happened would catch up with him. But grief has patience. It waits. And one night, it found him. I heard him crying from the living room long after midnight. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the kind of quiet breaking that happens when someone is finally alone with their thoughts. I sat beside him without speaking, my presence enough. When he leaned into me, it was like holding the boy he used to be and the man he had become at the same time. "I don't know who my father is anymore," he whispered. I held him tighter. "You know who you are," I said. "That's what matters." He didn't answer, but his breathing slowed, and eventually the tears stopped. Healing does not erase pain. It teaches you how to carry it without letting it crush you. At the bakery, Daniel became more confident. Customers responded to him, trusted him, appreciated his quiet honesty. Watching him step into that role filled me with a pride that had nothing to do with success and everything to do with resilience. We were building something together now, not out of obligation, but out of choice. One afternoon, as we were closing early, he surprised me. "I want to stay," he said. "Not just for now. I want to help you grow this. Make it stronger." I studied his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. There was none. "All right," I said simply. And that was how the next chapter began. Not with grand plans or sweeping promises, but with two people choosing to stand together and move forward. Julian tried once more to reach out months later, through a lawyer. He asked for a conversation, a chance to explain himself properly, to apologize without anger or embarrassment clouding the moment. I declined. Not because I hated him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. Closure is not something someone else gives you. It's something you take when you decide you are done reopening wounds that have already scarred. The town stopped talking eventually. People always do. Scandals burn hot and fast, then fade into background noise. New stories replaced ours. New mistakes. New betrayals. Mine became just another cautionary tale, stripped of faces and names. I didn't mind. Anonymity felt like freedom. I began doing things just for myself. I signed up for a short trip with a local group to visit coastal towns I had never seen. I walked along the water and let the wind tangle my hair. I ate meals alone without feeling lonely. I learned that solitude could be nourishing when it wasn't forced. One evening, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found a photograph from decades ago. Julian and me, young and hopeful, standing in front of the first bakery with flour on our clothes and smiles that felt genuine. I studied it for a long time, then placed it back in the drawer instead of tearing it up. That life had been real. The love had existed. But love, I finally understood, does not excuse betrayal. Memories do not demand continued sacrifice. You are allowed to honor what was without letting it define what remains. Daniel eventually moved into his own place again, not far from me. He needed his own space, his own sense of control. I understood. We still worked together every day. We still had dinner twice a week. Distance did not weaken our bond. It strengthened it. One night, as we locked up the bakery and stood outside under the soft glow of the streetlights, Daniel looked at me and smiled, a real smile, unburdened. "You know," he said, "you saved more than just the business." I raised an eyebrow. "You saved us," he continued. "You didn't let lies swallow everything." I thought about that as I walked home alone, keys warm in my hand. I had never set out to save anyone. I had only refused to disappear quietly. And maybe that was enough. Time passed. Seasons changed. The bakery expanded again, carefully, thoughtfully. I hired more staff, trained them well, and paid them fairly. I ran my business the way I always had, but now without apologizing for its success. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in the quiet kitchen and reflect on the woman I had been when this story began. The one who cleaned up after her husband while doubting her own instincts. The one who believed silence was safer than truth. The one who thought endurance meant accepting whatever came her way. I felt compassion for her. She had done the best she could with what she knew at the time. But I was no longer her. I had learned that strength is not about retaliation. It is about boundaries. About clarity. About choosing honesty even when it fractures the life you thought you had. I had also learned that revenge is not the point. Exposure is. Truth is. Light does not punish, it reveals. What collapses in it was never meant to stand. On a quiet Sunday morning, I stood behind the counter as customers came and went, the familiar bell ringing softly each time the door opened. I watched Daniel talk with a supplier, confident and calm. I watched a child press their face to the glass case, eyes wide with excitement. Life continued. And so did I. If there is one thing my story taught me, it is this. You can lose almost everything and still keep what matters most. Your work. Your dignity. Your ability to choose yourself. I did not get the ending I once imagined. I got something better. I got my life back. And that was enough.